Everything we experience spins off the placement of our intent. As Duane has said on many occasions, we are our intent. Creational cause and effect mechanics dictate that as the deciders, the thoughts we create, or those as created by others that we agree with, we will experience the effects of. When we are operating in a creation, especially on the physical, it's as though two experiential arenas are in operation. In reality, the moment we set an intent, the moment we forge our agreements, we are the immediate effects of what we have decided, and this can be very apparent on the real side, as we can be shown not only the effects of what we are deciding, but those of others, or indeed entire species. These serve as beneficial hints and warnings, where although we are experiencing our choices now, our created circumstances, our body forms, and life positioning accordingly, we have the option to make adjustments, to recognize the choices and agreements, if they are indeed poor, release that which yields little benefit, and replace these with agreements and intents which make more sense with life. As I said, where we are operating on the physical, it is as though we are playing two simulated games. One where we meet the instant effects of ourselves, the real side, and the other where the immediate effects, as they must be in this reality terms, where everything is what it is and has decided, intended to be now, are somewhat delayed, and that which we have projected ourselves into through our agreements we will experience at some point, but that may take months, years, to become apparent, even lifetimes, according to the nature of the idea we have embraced, or the intent established, the delay factor of the physical level. For the nature of a consciousness design dictates that the physical level effected from it, for humans at any rate, incorporates the additional ideas of time and space, which are applied to every idea we formulate effectively. On the real side, I may formulate the idea of a car, and a car there will be, effects we instantly manifest as it is in actuality. On the physical, so it has been decided that this is not the case, that a car requires construction, and a certain agreed-to time period must elapse for its completion. There is no reason why the physical can't reflect the real side more closely. It's just a matter of how the consciousness is programmed, and we see examples of how what has been established as a consciousness agreements can be overridden or even replaced for other agreements. Simulation then follows, and individuals are then breaking what would be construed as laws of physics, as they smash through barriers that were believed impossible to be broken. They achieve something within a time frame that was up until that moment considered unachievable, or override the constraints of the consciousness entirely, and perform what would be considered as feats of magic, as they may, as an example, manifest something instantaneously, the moment the thought idea pertaining to it is created. This delay factor of intent and agreement not being immediate on the physical can work in our favour, especially if we are shown certain things on the real side. The effects we are to walk into on the physical, should we continue to embrace the ideas that we are, and we have this delay factor as a window by which we can make agreement adjustments accordingly. And so, over the recent weeks, have I been having a constant real-side experiences of my physical level repositioning in Mexico, and as my intent is set for this to be so, it is therefore already in effect, in actuality. But the delay factor is in play, and where I must work within the ideas that consciousness comprises of, to make this a physical level occurrence, through the prerequisite actions and steps that must be taken. If everything is its effects, and we are our intent and agreements now, then the culmination of the intent and the simulated sequences of a time frame experiences that lead to this outcome are already in place, like a mini-movie I have made, and assuming my intent for the outcome remains so, I am really sitting through this movie that is already complete, as revealed on the real side, where I find myself already in Mexico. This delay factor can be useful as our windows to exact alteration to intent and agreement placement, if such isn't favourable, before it becomes a physical level manifest. But also, this window is opportunity for the dark forces, in all their expressions and forms, to attempt to disrupt, derail, and discourage an outcome that already is, but an outcome that only becomes so, physical level-wise, if the intent and agreement for it is maintained. And the dark forces have been rather creative in presenting me with all manner of simulated imagery deception in an effort to instill a doubt with my intent to relocate to Mexico, their usual preferred method being to mimic the appearances of others and present them in certain doubt-inducing ways, to assume the forms of Duane, Val, etc. The real awareness, however, is a part of this isness, everything a reality that is through all consciousness. It therefore has access to all the ideas behind the simulated fronts that are effected from them. As such, despite what we may see on the surface, in regards to specifically fake outer exteriors, shape-shifted forms, etc., the real awareness will recognize the actual beings that are presenting themselves in these alternative forms, and the intent behind their reason for doing so. On the real side, and with the real awareness impressions and creational overview, all deception is laid bare, and so this standard dark force methodology of a form deception can readily be determined. As an example, in this real side experience, I would find myself on a bus. Present also would be other new friends, all that I failed to recognise but for one, and that would be Kelsey. Our destination would be Mexico, and as the journey proceeded, we would be discussing various ears-related references, projects, and so forth. However, at a certain point, Kelsey would become as though disinterested in what we were discussing. This attitude would escalate to the extent of her dismissing the legitimacy of the new presentation, that it was a fake, and what it pertained and referenced, the ears, was a fallacy. Initially, my personal self would be somewhat perturbed by this, and a few doubts would creep in. But then, as Kelsey continued in this vein, her form would alter and become that of my sister Lindsay. What became glaringly apparent then was that this wasn't the genuine Kelsey, but that of her form being mimicked by Lindsay. I have had real side experiences with Lindsay over the years. She flip-flops between stepping up and becoming more aware and operating in sincere and life-supporting ways to the opposite end of the spectrum, that of working with the dark forces. Evidently, she also has this shape-altering capability, or has developed it in recent times. And currently, it would seem she has once again elected to pitch in with the dark forces, and be a part of this real side attempted deception, to assume Kelsey's form and attempt to discourage me. Not so much, then, that her ability to maintain her altered form was lacking, but that the real awareness could see through the surface front to what lay beneath, and was revealing this to the personal self, as Lindsay seemed oblivious that she had been exposed, as she continued to speak ill of the new presentation, etc. And indeed, as the bus came to a halt, as I then would decide to determine the identities of what I thought to be other new friends, as it transpired they would be other members of my family. What can happen, especially for the unconscious and unaware, is that they will be completely locked into and in agreement with the consciousness, completely personal self-immersed. The human consciousness has been programmed into agreement with the darker forces, so it follows that were a human in a total agreement immersion with the consciousness, by default they are in agreement with the darker forces, and indeed are helping in maintaining the dark forces' control by doing so, and this will express on the real side in various ways. Everything from them presenting as disruptors to being puppeteered by the dark forces and the influence to interfere where they have opportunity to do so. And for the unconscious, one-dimensional human, they will be oblivious of these automatic interfering actions. They simply are operating according to their consciousness, a consciousness that is in agreement and support of the darker forces. Therefore, will they automatically always potentially present as disruptors to that which opposes the dark forces' desires, that being those that are stepping up and assisting with a creational wake-up that will be detrimental to the control the dark forces wish to perpetuate. The other family members in this experience would fit the category of unaware and in automatic unconscious agreement support of the darker forces. Lindsay, however, is somewhat more aware, and so her choices and actions are more conscious, and so it seemed she was willingly operating in a disrupting capacity, very likely on behalf of the darker forces she keeps being drawn into. Although the deception was unveiled, the family members and Lindsay still seemed unaware that they had been exposed, that I had seen them for who they were, especially Lindsay with her outward Kelsey guise. With such a deception, if we are not immediately aware of it, as what we are experiencing represents ideas, as everything does, this deception, these ideas, I would then have agreed with, as my initial assumption was that these were genuine NuFriends. As we agree with such idea deceptions, we agree with the consciousness and the intentionality also of the deceptors. As such, we are the effects of the overall nature of this idea package, and dark force-orientated intent and ideas will generally generate effects that are less than favourable. In this case, due to my extended agreement, I would now be meeting the effects of doing so, effects that can be mitigated the moment we realise the nature of the agreements we have inadvertently taken on, but on occasion we actually may choose, or rather the real awareness does, to experience the effect fallout, even if it is unsavoury, as after all, everything we experience is just a simulation, all as viewpoints and comparison references to recognise the ears by. Surely then we would seek to experience it all, to glean as many comparisons as possible. And also, as the personal self is put through what could have been avoided, as with agreement released, there can be no simulated following effect and experience. So as we share what transpired, others can be afforded warnings of the various potentialities they too may face. And so, through my initial agreement with the deception, especially with Lindsay and her intentionality for disruption, with the agreement to the intentionality maintained, this manifested in my experiencing of being relocated to what seemed to be an area or position in creation that impressions suggested was as though a dark force managed containment of a kind, a means of isolating individuals and locking them down effectively. Although in this contained, real side position I would not be alone, I was in the company of a unit of soldiers seemingly, individuals dressed in military garments, who also had been locked down in this dark force containment. Impressions revealed these were in fact individuals who had been stepping up also in their own respective ways, but either through agreements as yet unreleased, or perhaps through similar deceptive methods that had claimed their agreements, had they also been brought here and confined by the dark forces. It seemed they were in their very initial stages of becoming more aware. As such, try as I might, I couldn't quite get through to them or assist them in their situation in any way. Realistically, they had to recognise their agreements and release them if they desired liberation from their contained predicament. That the guides or other NuFriends could assist them also, but assistance too requires agreement, and they were either unwilling or not aware enough to recognise the necessity of requesting such. but should their awareness processes continue, this situation would be rectified, I had no doubt. That they were dressed as soldiers, really more indicative of their intent set with their processes of awareness, as the wearing of military garments tends represent on the real side focus, determination, and a drive to achieve a certain outcome. The guides very often present as high-ranking military officers, or even the police, as an example. The individuals in their soldier uniforms also were in a constant training, performing military drills, etc., further indication of their intent set with the ears, representing a constant refining of their personal self-intent, that it aligns more so with the real awareness intent for ears recognition. And again, very often are NuFriends presented on the real side as soldiers for this reason, for indeed the process of getting through a creation has been described as a boot camp, through which we become more capable to handle all situations and creational eventualities. As I couldn't assist these individuals, I would in fact participate in their training, as though, while in my containment with them, I reasoned that I may as well pass the time in this way, symbolically representing my refining more so of my own personal self-intent, as we all are in a constant state of a personal self-adjustment, agreement facing and releasing, and cultivating our focus and intent with the ears, etc. Interestingly, along with myself and the soldiers, of which all were human, would be present, and similarly dark force contained, another group of beings. They additionally would be humanoid appearance-wise, and impressions suggested they too were making their first tentative steps into the true reality of their real awareness states of being. As such, they also had fallen foul to agreements that had them in the same predicament, and like the soldiers, they were at that moment rather beyond assistance, or in reality beyond the ability to assist themselves, to recognize the agreements that had them contained and release them, or extend the option for others to assist. There was, however, one among them that was far more aware, and although trapped also, was more willing to engage with me, as I practically drowned her in references and literal information regarding creation, its mechanics, cause and effect, agreements, intent, etc., and so forth, but she eagerly accepted and was open to it all. The form she and her group took were curious. It's a given that every body form is a simulated, computer game-like, consciousness-affected avatar, regardless of how they might appear and how solid they seem. But this group of beings, humanoid, as I said, possessed of simulated body forms that very much looked like those depicted in computer games, and not very advanced computer games at that, as though somewhat crude and even a tad glitchy, as their forms would flicker and warp. They were nearly translucent as well, and on occasion to the extent that you could see through their bodies, almost suggesting the consciousness that generated their forms was in some way malfunctioning, a glitchy computer or corrupted files will generate game characters in equally as distorted measure as an analogy. Regardless, this didn't seem in any way to be detrimentally impacting for them, and the aware female was established more so as the group's leader. As I said, the soldiers were resigned to the containment area through a virtue of them really deciding to be so, as they retained the agreement that had them placed there, unrecognizing that all that was required was the agreement's release. For myself, the personal self had simply been put through the experience, not just for the viewpoint and comparison, but to potentially engage or attempt to with the other beings also contained. For as impressions revealed, this agreement could at any moment have been released, and liberation be so, but I remained as long as was necessary to determine if I could get the attention of the other contained beings, and perchance assist them if they allowed and agreed to it. And although the soldiers were beyond my ability to afford assistance, this more aware female, with her curiously dysfunctional body form, not only then recognized that she could extricate herself from this predicament through simply releasing the agreement that effected her there, but as the leader of her group, so all the beings that were a part of it would follow suit, follow her lead, be willing also to accept and be open to the notions and reality of the creational mechanics, cause and effect principles that are based on agreement. As such, all of these humanoid beings with their glitchy body forms would release this agreement, forged through deceptive dark force means as it had been with me, and I would do likewise, and we no longer would be thus contained. The group was far more extensive than I realized, numbering in the thousands, I would estimate, and I had the view of them floating off and returning to whichever position in creation they hailed from, all with their intents maintained to continue their respective awareness journeys. As for the soldiers, my impressions were that they would eventually be liberated also, as they too had their intent placed with the ears, and either they would liberate themselves at some stage, or be open to others assisting them in doing so. And as for Lindsay and my family members, I would find myself now standing with what impressions revealed was a real guide, and he was confronting them over their choices to be involved in this attempted disruption. A disruption overall designed as a discouraging tactic in regards to my going to Mexico, which culminated in an attempted containment, but which actually became an opportunity to assist others as it transpired. The family members were in oblivious states, typical of unconscious, unaware beings, as though not even aware of their surroundings or of myself and the guide's presence. But Lindsay was far more conscious of the situation she was in, as the guide gave her a dressing down, as after all, the guides had previously extended her opportunity to be involved with real side assignments and experiences, etc., and very likely would continue to do so, but only if she checked her intent placement misplaced loyalty and sincerity, and there the experience ended.
Well, again, Kevin, that was terrific. The explanation is just great. It's just excellent. And yes, the intent, as we know, is very, very important. And when that becomes more so than anything, well, that's automatically directed with the real guidance. But if it's wishy-washy or this or that, life can see that. And so that makes the difference. And just like your sister or whatever. And the shapeshifters can, they can also disguise themselves as your family on the real side, which they have. But in the meantime, because of their intent, because of what they're looking at, their placement is in the personal area. Well, everybody has the right to choose their life, and it's all fine. Nothing is negated. And that's what they've chosen. So the real guidance cannot, appear for those that just want their personal life first, because then you'll just be stuck in the personal life because you made the decision. It's just really that simple. And so old words of wisdom, masters and gurus, gods, and all this savior stuff, no, it's not going to do it, because you are the decider of your life, etc. So it's interesting, the scenario that's played there. And yes, and also the idea being that, there's an influence there to try and influence you from, proceeding, basically. It's not so much about Mexico or anything, but proceeding with the adventure to just, be normal. I had friends and family in the past, they said the same thing. Why can't you be normal? Well, I'm not interested. I'm more interested in what's real. And as this world is a fabrication, it's fine, it's necessary, but at the same time, it's not all there is. And it's very easy to see, which most people don't want. It's right in front of you, what's happening here, and it's happened many times before, and this realm is imploding. That's it. And the person's physical body is growing old. That's it too, and soon be gone. And most people aren't prepared. They don't know where they're going. They really don't. They have a belief system. That all means nothing, but in their minds it means something, but they will cross over. Yeah, the real awareness can't be heard, but they won't know where they're at. And so what they'll do is they'll just lend themselves to their old routines and take on another body form unconsciously, and just like here, forget how they came here, even why they came here, etc., because they don't know. They're just going through the routines. And so what you've explained there is really a small view of the bigger picture, and there's so much more taking place. And again, we know that it's not about good or bad in creation, it's about experience, and all life is awareness. And so the experience is part of that, but that's to lead the individual to recognizing what's real aside from creation, and that's huge. And so your experience here and your sharing, Kevin, is just terrific. Thank you so much. So the adventure goes on. And I like the challenge too. So when people say no, I don't listen. Yeah, because I'm the decider. I'll decide. Yes, thank you, Kevin.